Genesis 8 and 9. Last week we began studying the Great Flood. We discussed the wickedness of Noah's world, how the Lord told him to build a massive ship that would contain his wife and family and pairs of each animals. And finally, after years of warning, no one listened, and the animals entered the ark. The rains came. We talked about not just rain, but the fountains of the deep literally exploding from the ocean floor, covering the entire earth. And everything on the earth, every living thing perished. Everything on land, anyway. Let's go into Genesis 8. All right, the floods have stopped, and now again it's talking about the world after the flood begins here, but they're still on the boat. 8, 1-5. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused the wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. Also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. And the water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of the 150 days the water decreased. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountain of Ararat. The water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So a lot of specific dates are given here. You know, it's not just round numbers. This shows someone was actually keeping a record of how long this thing was going on. I want you to think in your mind the most severe weather you have experienced in your life. You know, either snow, blizzard, here, your inconvenience a day or two, hurricanes. You know, it's really just bored up for one day. You know, there are occasions if your home is damaged where it could last several weeks getting things straight. But imagine this, they're floating on a giant vessel, and the world beneath them is completely devastated. There's nothing left, no human life, no signs of civilization, and even the landmarks that they knew are all totally wiped out. And although the rain lasts 40 days, I'm sure that was the first major milestone when they woke up that morning and didn't hear that coming on top of the ark. Finally at last, that's over, but they were really just getting started after 40 days. Here are the other marks. So after 150 days, the waters decrease. So I guess everything just settled for that period of time and then started going down. So 150 days, that's about 5 months into the journey. And this is on the 17th day, on the 7th month, sure they're floating and floating, and all of a sudden they hear this loud crash and they make landfall, which I'm sure was startling, but at least they knew that's a sign the water's going down. And then the 10th day, the 10th month, they began to see the tops of the mountains. So I imagine all those days, day after day, year after year, they're thinking, we're just going to be on this boat the rest of their lives. And I'm sure it must have been encouraging to start to see the peaks of the mountain, and then each day seeing more mountain and less water. So that was a sign that it's going to take a while, but eventually it's going to go down. So the flood ends, and now we have the process of getting off the ark and starting civilization again. Genesis 8, 6-12. Then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. So after the rain stopped, he opened the window and they saw sunshine for the first time in over a month. You know how it can get here 2 or 3, 4 days in a row when it'll rain, and people say, where on earth is the sunshine and it looks so good? Just imagine seeing it after 40 days and it had been covered up. And he sent out a raven, and it flew out here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. Hopefully he did better than the raven last night. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot, so she returned to him and to the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So he waited yet another 7 days, and he sent the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in his beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Then he waited yet another 7 days, sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. So here's a pattern of events that's kind of self-explanatory. But first he sends out a raven, and he goes just out flying the earth. So apparently that has the ability to sustain itself even without land. Maybe it can just rest on the top of the water. Then he sends out a dove, and it comes back again. So he said, well, there's nowhere for the dove to go. So he waits another week. Because, man, these are just long processes. You think a week today can go by quick, but then, there's basically nothing to do, I guess, but feed the animals. So these long days, a week later, he sends out the dove, and then the dove comes back with a little piece of olive leaf, and I'm sure that was great encouragement to them. Not only are they seeing land, that's life again. That means growth is coming up. And then finally, the third time, he sends out the dove, and it doesn't come back at all. So both the raven and the dove had not come back, so I said, well, that's good. And they found a place to stay, and this means the water is beginning to come down from the earth. So now we're going to begin the process of coming off the ark, and you can imagine, even though the ark is very big, like I think it was, we said last week, 300 was it?
Like 500 foot long.
Okay, like yes, it was a little more than a football field. So, well, that's big to be confined to that place for over a year. You can imagine they were ready to get out there, smell fresh air, walk on the ground, even though they had no clue where they were. All right, verse 13 through 19. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, so you can say that was Noah's 601st birthday, the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. Maybe just knocked the roof out, maybe that let the birds release anyway into the air. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spoke to Noah, saying, I wanted to point this here, okay? Genesis 14, 8:14. The second month on the 27th day, of the month. If you look back last week, chapter 7, verse 11, it says, on the second month, on the 17th day of the month. So that's a year and 10 days total. Back to verse 14. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God spake to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by the families from the ark. Once again, that absolute language, it makes sure that every animal on the earth today are descended from the animals that came out of that ark that day. So, this is, Noah's now 601 years old. He lived, we'll talk about at the end of this lesson, over 900 years like all the people in Genesis, but I'm sure of all his 950 years, this was by far the longest. Now again, imagine their feeling as they walked out there. For the first time, they're walking on ground for over a year after being stopped up in that ark. I'm sure they had ways of maybe ventilation and stuff, but after a year, it was probably just getting overwhelming, and they were just so, as people say today, that I'm so over it, and I'm so over feeding animals all day long, and I'm ready to get out of here. So they get out of the ark, but it's almost as if the Lord said, I'm going to destroy this planet, get on a rocket ship, and go to another planet, because the earth they walked on, I've emphasized this over and over. Now you still have the sun, the moon, the stars, but all the landmarks are gone. Giant mountains cover the earth now that did not exist in the pre-flood world, because they land on top of a mountain. That's one of the first places they land. We now have a divided earth, more than likely. Continents have separated instead of one giant land continent. And they don't know where they are. They basically, it's just those 8, so doesn't really matter. Wherever they landed, that's where civilization was going to begin again. And it's almost like a second Eden. In Eden, they told Adam and Eve to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. The only thing different here, Noah and his wife are done with having children, but it's like they have 3 pairs of Adam and Eve, Shem and his wife, Ham and his wife, Japheth and his wife, and each of those three, so that will make the population be able to grow a little more faster in this world after the flood. Just remember, it's only them. One of my flood novels, which is fiction, just imagines what it could be like. A few days after they had left the ark, they sent Noah and his three sons went out scouting to landscape or check the land out and where to go, and they left the four women alone at night. It doesn't matter because there's no one else on earth. You certainly have to worry about no one other than the animals. So I'm sure we're just running like crazy. You could just get inside the ark, get you a safe bed, and have no worries because there's no one out there. You're certainly not going to be harmed. So, and those first few years must have been really lonely, but I'm sure even the Lord probably enabled them, and I'm sure they quickly had an abundance of children, and in just a few years' time, each of the three families had several children, and then, a few generations, civilization began to develop again. But as in the days of Adam and Eve, of course, it was slowly and gradual. The chapter closes out. So one of the first things they did, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So remember last week we talked about he didn't just take all by twos, some by sevens, and this was part of the reason because he offered some for sacrifices. So if he just took two of everything, whatever he offered for a sacrifice, it would have wiped out that species because they wouldn't be able to reproduce anymore. They wouldn't exist. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. Remember last week I wrote verses that emphasize the globalness of the flood. Said he will never do this again. All right. Has there ever been a flood since then? Has there been a devastating flood since then? Yes, it's killed lots of people, but there's never been one like that one. So this is the second point. This one was different. Well, remember, global flood, young earth, not a global flood, old earth. So we believe in a young earth, or I believe. Finally, verse 22, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. We have the promise of the Lord that as long as this earth stands, there's going to be summer, winter. There's going to be 4 seasons. There's going to be seed time and harvest. Despite what the global warmer or climate changers say, man does not have the ability to change the climate. We go in long cycles. We look back at our past. Really, they've only been keeping records since about day by day since the 1800s, but I heard of times in the Middle Ages there was a really warm period, 300 or 400 years ago, or really cold. There's cycles, that last for years, but for the most part, it's consistent. Now, possibly before the flood, there might not have been cold weather. Might have just been a tropical land all over the world, but now, beginning with Noah at least, we have 4 seasons. So this new world's begun. Maybe they first started out with a little encampment. Like I said, you didn't have to really build a fort because there's no people out there to attack you. I guess only some protection from perhaps wild animals. And imagine all of them after cooped up for a year, they were just took off running and looking to settle. And you had to believe the Lord was supernaturally blessing those animals, probably allowing them to have litters immediately and just to begin to increase the population. So that's the world they live in. And now, we're going to talk a little bit about the sacrifice. All right, chapter 9. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Remember, he said that same thing to Adam back in Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky. So it was just like almost Adam and Eve all over again, only this time Noah and his children. The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. And we can see that now, of course, you walk by a small or whenever you see a wild animal, what they do when you come, they take off running. They know this is man's world. Even the fiercest beasts don't go out hunting man. I mean, they can attack if you maybe come into their territory, but there's all something supernaturally the Lord has put on them, knowing that mankind is the ruler of the earth, and the animals are subject to him, just built in their nature. Key verse here. Okay, have I read that yet? With everything that creeps on, and all the fish of the sea, into your hands they are giving. Verse 3, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. Okay, there's a change now. Let's again go back to Genesis 1, when God initially created the earth. He told Adam and Eve in 1:29, then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be for you. So just fruits and vegetables in the days of Adam and Eve and up through the flood. And Noah, in contrast, he said, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. The only requirement is only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Surely I will require your life blood from every beast, I will require it. And from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. So two things are established here. Number one, we can eat meat now. I don't know if any of them on board had tried it before. I'm sure in the pre-flood world, with that, as wicked as they weren't following the ordinance of God, and many had tried meat. But imagine the first time the meat was put in front of him, maybe they were, intimidated if you'd never had it in your life. Maybe it smelled good, and then finally they tasted it, saying, and I'm glad they did. So there was one thing good come out of the flood, as I'm a person who loved meat and a good steak. This began here. I don't know if there was just 2 cows on the boat. They couldn't took them right away, but I'm sure somewhere someone invented the first steak and said, man, this is good stuff. So meat eating has now begun, and also capital punishment. Cain killed Abel, and he's not put to death. And then Cain's descendant, Lamech, which we talked about, killed a man. He said, I've killed a man. But now God has set like a universal law. If you put someone to death, that's going to be required of you. You also shall be put to death. It says here, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For the image of God he made man. As for you, and in verse 7, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly, and multiply in it. Now once again, after the flood, they're not going to live quite as long, but can you just imagine here, you got Noah, all right, 3 children. It'll list their children next week. They each have about 4 or 5 kids each. They'll intermarry, so that's about 30 people here, 30 couples. Imagine each of them having 5 or 6 children. So that's right away in a couple generations. You got, 30 times 150. Then imagine each of them having 5, because they're all having abundance of children early. Each of them having 5 or 6, and you can see the exponential curve within a couple hundred years, which will be on all their lifespan. You'll have a few thousand people. So it doesn't take long when people are healthy, and I'm sure because of the devastation, the Lord is just enabling them to have children, and probably blessing them fertily and allowing them to have a lot for this earth to begin to grow again. And within a couple hundred years, you probably have a community set up, maybe even outskirts of the city and things of that nature, which we'll get into next week with the Tower of Babel. All right, verses 8 through 17. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, now behold, I myself to establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. So the Lord makes a covenant. And with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by water of the flood, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. All right, let's write that down again. Remember all the verses we wrote last week that pointed to a global flood and its devastation. These are two more this week. 8:21, which we just read. I will never again curse the ground on account of man, and I'll never destroy every living thing as I have just done. And then the verse we just read, 9:11, I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by water of the flood, neither shall there be again to be a flood to destroy the earth. So those who teach that the earth is old, teach that death existed millions of years before Adam ever sinned, and Adam's sin only brought about death to the human race. So God made a world of death. And those same people also, because they believe death and fossils were here long before Adam and Eve, they don't believe there was a global flood which would have devastated the earth and changed everything. They believe it was a local flood. And we talked about last week how absurd that is. It just doesn't make sense at all. How can you have a flood devastating enough to kill every person on the planet but not cover the whole earth? It just doesn't make sense. And once again, here's another verse that says he will never again send a flood that will destroy the earth. I think of the tsunami again in 2004. I think it killed maybe over 100,000 people because it hit in such a place in Indonesia that just wiped out so many people. So that's a massive flood. I mean, but the Lord didn't say he wouldn't send a flood again. He said he would never send a flood that will destroy the entire earth. This was unique, it was global, and if the flood was global, that's one of the two key signs that points that the earth is young and not old, like they tell us, like a lot of the secular scientists and Christians tell us who have compromised their view on the Bible. We'll continue reading verse 12. God said, this is a sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign for a covenant between me and the earth. How many of you, when you ride and see a rainbow, doesn't the thought hit your mind, there's a sign again? Yes. Some are brighter than others. I don't know if anyone stands out in your life. I just remember one time, years ago, I walked out of my house across from the high school, and there was just this massive, gigantic one that went all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. I grabbed the camera and took a picture real quick, which usually a camera doesn't do justice, but it was just so amazing. And you see some that just are bright enough. Sometimes you just barely say, oh, look, I see a rainbow over there. Some that just stands out. But whatever the case, each time you see one, it's a sign of God saying, yes, that's a sign of my covenant. Yes. I will not send a flood to destroy the earth. Did rainbows exist before the flood? Maybe they didn't. Maybe the earth, it just changed everything. So it's very possible. Verse 14, it shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth that the bow will be seen in the cloud. And I'll remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy the earth. So again, we could put that. So when people say Noah's flood didn't destroy the whole earth, we can list these three verses. And all the verses we listed last week, we can just go down by down by down and just say, if you don't believe the flood was global, you're basically undermining all the authority of Scripture. In verse 16, when the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is a sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. So the flood has ended. The animals have been released. They've descended upon the earth. They've offered up sacrifices to the Lord. The Lord has sent them the rainbow, give them the promise there won't be a flood again. Now a little bit now about the upcoming years and Noah's family. Verses 18 and 19. Now the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. So when the Israelites, hundreds of years in the future, when they invade the promised land, they have to take out the Canaanites. These are all descendants of Ham's son, Canaan, or Noah's grandson. Canaan will go into the promised land and be the first settler there. These were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated, right? Do my geography drawing. You remember we had a picture of a speculation of maybe the earth was just one continent like that. All right, now the continents are fixed. So we've got Africa down here, Europe, Asia, India, and all that. So more than likely, Ham went here, became the father of the African people, and also the people where Israel is now, the Canaanites. So this is Ham. Japheth went to Europe in this area. So most of us here are from European ancestry. We come from Noah's son Japheth. Shem became the father of, eventually the father of the Israelites, and possibly maybe even the Asian people here. And so from that, basically the three sons, that's what spread into the earth, and then eventually people thought maybe there maybe is a land bridge to Australia and to North America where the Indians came, and eventually, so that's how the world all descended from these three sons. So like I said, when I trace my ancestry back, when you hit a wall and you can't go back any further, go all the way back and go to Japheth, and then that can take you all the way back to Adam, where we've all have descended. All right, then verse 20. Then Noah began farming. This is really the only story we have about Noah after the flood. It's not a positive one. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. All right. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away, so they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants. He shall be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." All right, this is one of those stories in the Bible. It really doesn't give full details. I thought of another one with Moses and his son when he was little. If you just read it from the surface, it looks like Ham walks in, sees his father there in that drunken state, and just leaves him there and goes and tells his brothers. And his brothers, when they hear it, they go in backwards so they won't see their naked father and cover him up. But then Noah makes his proclamation when he recovers from this. When Noah woke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Did Ham do something terrible? We don't know, but as a result, Noah proclaims this curse. And he says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servant. He shall be to his brothers." Why? And some have said, tried to say, well, the African race are cursed because of this, what happened to Ham. But he doesn't curse Ham, from whom most people from Africa came from. He curses specifically Canaan. So Canaan's descendants, and they became the Canaanites. And you know how wicked these people were that inhabited the promised land. Sodom and Gomorrah, whoever formed those cities came from these descendants, so it was perhaps related to that. But he also said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem." From Shem, which we're going to see next week, came Abraham and the Jewish people, or the Israeli people and the Jewish race from whom the Lord was eventually born, so we see the blessing there. He said, "Japheth, may God enlarge your tents." And from Japheth came the Greeks and the Romans, and basically changed Western civilization and ruled the world, so he blessed them. And he closes out again, and let Canaan be his servant. So that's all we can really say about the curse of Cain. Something must have terrible happened in that tent for Noah to say something so strong. One of my readings speculated that the reason Noah cursed his son Canaan knew that would affect Ham even more if he had done anything to his own self. But as a result, And we'll see in, next week, whose Canaan's descendants became familiar names in the Bible. They're all traced back here, so everything on the earth now, every civilization traces back to these people. And finally, one more passage of scripture, or verses, last two verses of chapter 9. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So this is the end of the people living all that time. So from the line of Adam to Noah, that's 10 generations. 7 of them lived over 900 years. One of them was 895, so you might as well say 8 of 10. Noah's father died just short of 800, was the youngest, other than Enoch that we talked about, who was translated but did not see death. People will no longer live these long lifespans anymore. And so even though Noah lived 350 years after the flood, his body, I guess, had lived so long in that pre-flood world that it preserved it to continue to live that lifespan. But as we'll see next week, all of his sons, although they lived extremely long, they did not live nowhere as long as Noah did. So this is the end of longevity like that. Perhaps meat-eating diet cuts down some of the life, but I'm sure most important is the earth has been changed, the environment, and people just will not live that long anymore. And just remember, so 350, we talked about, this is just in 2 generations. In 350 years, you know, that's about several, 10, maybe 10 generations. There's probably tens of thousands of people on earth the time Noah died, and every single one of them were descendants of him. You know, sometimes we'll see an older person die that had 4 or 5 children, and they'll say, you know, many grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Noah had it numbered in the tens of thousands. But now we're entering into the new world. Next week, we're going to talk about Babel, the descendants of Noah, where they spread out, and we're going to do another genealogy thing like I did with Genesis 5. I guess it was a couple weeks ago. We're going to look at those numbers again, and it's going to be interesting to look at. Bear with me, as I told you, I like doing the genealogies. If you remember the genealogy in Genesis 5, they were all consistent with about their age when they had their children and how long they lived. You'll see in this next genealogy from Shem to Abraham how the lifespans begin to decrease rapidly and get us to where we are in present day. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah. Chapter 9, 3 and 4 says, all living creatures are yours for food, just as I give you plants, now I give you everything else, except for meat with its lifeblood still in it. Is that talking about cannibalism?
I'm really not sure, because when God sets the law hundreds of years later to Moses, he restricts animals, but he still gives that thing, don't eat anything with it. I don't know if it's just you're not supposed to eat blood. It's a sign of, you know, that's what flows through the animal. That's what gives it its life. And when you eat that, that's kind of like, I don't know, it means desecrating or something like that, but I don't think it means that. I think it just means, you know, eat the meat is allowed, but make sure the blood is drained from it. And a point of note, when you cut which I like a medium rare steak,
I do too.
when you cut it, that's not blood. That's just the meat's red. People, it's still got blood in it. The meat's red. That's the juice of the meat inside of it.
It's blood,
I know
Kevin.
Charles likes
You
well
can't go
done.
around it.
Charles eat chicken, like the sign says, if you like well done steak.
I like mine burnt.
I like my chicken and my pork well, but my steak,
Medium rare.
can't go rare, not quite that rare.
I like
I like some
medium rare.
warm, but medium
Horse
rare.
still beating.
Medium rare.
Anyone else have anything?
Can it, talking about, the older people before Noah.
Right,
Well, you know who the oldest man was? Methuselah.
Methuselah,
Of 969
69.
years.
incredible.
I won't live that long.
No, it's, I guess, well, I'm assuming they probably matured, maybe they probably reached
Like
adulthood,
his
maybe like 30, but then it was just, you know, a long process, probably, you know, 400 or 500 was middle age.
Yeah,
And, you know, like at your age now, that you would just be entering, you know, adulthood. So if you felt like that, it might be different than, you know,
They
if
felt better
you're
than
young
we
and
did.
healthy. But I mean, it wouldn't be like
they
today.
were healthier than we are now.
You just imagine a person today, 100 years old, basically, is almost helpless. Of course, usually if they live that long, they're in good health, but you wouldn't have aged to 100 like that and then lived another 800 years. So they had to have been young, and, you know,
Yeah.
Shem was 100 at the flood and probably just a young man, but then the lifespans will begin to decrease, so. All right, well, we thank you for the study of your word today. Bless us today, bless the service, Lord, and be with every one of us in our needs. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.